Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries for our 4th episode on Knife of Dreams. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and forgive me for a very poor, rough, scratchy voice, and probably more cuts than normal, just to cough and sneeze and stuff. I've had a pretty harsh cold for the past week or so, and I thought that this video, as well as basically all of the rest of December's videos, would be done a little bit earlier, but on account of the cold, haven't been able to be done yet. But that's neither here nor there. Today we are going to be talking about another section of Knife of Dreams, that is chapters 12 through 7. No, that's a lie. It's not chapters 12 through 17. It is chapters 18 through 24 that we are covering in today's diary, and that reading this week has been about 6.5 hours worth of reading. At the time of recording this, actually, I have read through chapter 30, which is going to go through next week's diary as well. I'm going to be recording that right after this one, assuming that nothing goes horribly wrong over the course of trying to record these two videos. But as of this video's worth of reading, I've read for just under 24 hours, Knife of Dreams, so it's been a lot, and thankfully I can say at this point that the book's starting to pick up. The back half of this book is a good bit stronger than the front half of the book, generally speaking, was for me, and that is a very, very nice thing, and is even more the case, is even more easy to see, I guess, come next week's diary. But that's all stuff that we'll talk about next week. For spoiler-free impressions of what I did read this week, like I said, we're covering chapters 18 through 24 today. Man, I'm just gonna have to briefly look through some of this stuff to try to remember what it is all happened. We had some Rand POV stuff, which was great. The Rand POV stuff in this book, long overdue. The whole entire first half of the book basically not touching that. Definitely had some a couple of bigger moments in this section here that I was very glad to see, that were very solid. And then following that, we have a little bit of White Tower stuff going on that we're going to talk about this week as well. I say that I'm going to be covering through chapter 24. Technically, I'm going to be covering a little bit of chapter 25 as well, and that is because for some reason Robert Jordan does some weird structural things with the chapters, come chapters 25 through, 27 or so, where there are weird POV splits in there, where he could have just split some of these things into multiple chapters, or had there's the first POV of chapter 25 that should have just been at the end of chapter 24, even if it made that chapter even longer than it already was. There's just some weird POV splitting up stuff going on, but most of that we'll be covering in next week's reading. So, as far as the impressions go, like I said, Rand POV stuff this week was pretty good. There's some solid stuff in there, and then there's a little bit of White Tower stuff to talk about this week as well. So that is basically what we've got going on. So we're going to go ahead and start the spoiler section of this video, just because, man, trying to talk out loud right now, I can already tell this is going to be rough, so I don't want to be talking much longer than I strictly have to at this point. So, chapters 18 through, I'm pretty sure 21, are all of the Rand POV chapters, so let's just talk about all that happened there. It's not just Rand POV as well, mind you. There's a little bit of Loyal POV in here. There might be a little bit of something else randomly sprinkled in there, but for the most part it is Rand's storyline. That's what's going on over here, stuck near tier. And yeah, we'll just jump right into it. Chapter 18 sees Loyal trying to get some information from Rand for the book that Loyal has up to this point been trying to write about all of the events with the Dragon Reborn and Rand and everything going on in the world at this point. And throughout this little bit of conversation that happens in chapter 18 for the book, Rand continues to have visions of Mat and Perrin. This is something that has continued to be a recurring theme, honestly, for a while of this series at this point, at least a book or two by now, and just has kind of become normal. Not really anything to say about what is seen in basically any of it. That's just stuff that continues happening here. in the midst of some of this discussion, the chapter is titled News for the Dragon, and we do get news for the dragon when Logain actually shows up in chapter 18 to basically say that there are lots of Ashaman now that are kind of split up in between Ilian, as well as being sent to Eridoman to be able to do stuff according to what Rand needs. And Logain also warns Rand about the fact that Mazrim Taim is probably plotting something against him, or at the very least has some of his own shady business dealings going on. He has his own kind of faction amongst the Black Tower, some of his own Ashaman loyalists that are not sworn specifically to Rand, but are rather sworn to Taim. This is something that concerns Logain, but that Rand doesn't really have much time to worry about right now. So I'm sure that's going to be something that comes back around in the primary narrative at some point. Just not entirely sure how or to what degree or anything like that. And then we have the chapter closing with Nynaeve warning of a storm that is about to occur that's not necessarily talking about the weather. And it's kind of determined that the storm may or may not be Tarmon Gai'dan, which is, the last battle. This section, this week's reading worth of the diary, we have a lot of moments of various characters going around and doing things and informing other people that the last battle is coming. So we're finally actually legitimately ramping up for the final act of the series here, which fucking finally, I gotta say, definitely taken long enough, but at this point, like I said, Rand and basically everybody else kind of starts talking about how the last battle is fast approaching, but the storm that Nynaeve warns about seems to be what basically happens in chapters 19 and 20, where chapter 19 basically kind of starts off where the very end of chapter 18 technically ends, and that is with Loyal's mother and his betrothed and elder Haman or Haman, however you want to pronounce it. I don't care how to pronounce these names at this point, from Steading Shangtai, surprising Loyal by arriving where it is that these people are at. Loyal's pretty worried about having to go back to the Steading and not being able to finish his book. He wants to be able to follow Rand around some more and be able to work more on his book. But in this surprise visit, there's a very quick formal marriage that occurs between him and Aerith. So that's pretty neat. And because Loyal is now a married man at this point, technically speaking, as officiated by Elder Haman, they all make to return to their steading to speak at the Great Stump, because apparently the Great Stump is something that is happening right now, and Loyal is able to speak at that now because he's married, much to his own mother's chagrin, where Loyal kind of argues against some of his own mother's ideas about what it is that the Ogier should do, where his mother seems to think that the Ogier should kind of disappear until the last battle's over or something, I'm guessing is what's implied there, and then they can return and kind of start rebuilding stuff. But Loyal's perspective is that the Ogier have a duty to kind of help the humans with the battle because they've helped in previous types of wars and this kind of nonsense. So that's that's something that's a little interesting to note. I guess we'll see if we ever see anything regarding any of that with Loyal's POV, if we ever actually get to see any of that happen. But in the midst of all this discussion, Loyal does notice that there are a bunch of Trollocs outside, and he calls an alarm to defend the location, basically, because, the entire group has to defend against something like 100,000, Shadowspawn army with a whole bunch of Trollocs, some Fades in there as well, Mirdraw. This includes Rand and all the others as well performing in this battle, and Rand particularly notes in this chapter that he loses control over Lews Therin with regard to Sidon, with regard to the power. Lews Therin is able to take a lot more power before he's able to really rein any of that in, and Lews Therin uses several usages of magic that Rand seems to be fairly unfamiliar with up to this point, or doesn't actually know how to do, but now he knows how to do because Lews Therin just kind of did them through his own body, which is interesting. After the battle, you have, a lot of destruction, basically. Lews Therin doesn't let go of the source of magic until it's kind of promised that he and Rand can collectively die at the last battle instead of right now, because Lews Therin is a crazy person in Rand's head who just wants to, die. So that's interesting. Chapter 20 sees a little bit of the aftermath of this battle. That was a pretty epic battle sequence, I gotta say. Nice to have some of those actually happening again for the first time in a while. Chapter 20 sees more of the aftermath of that. There's a lot of destruction, not enough channelers amongst the group between Asha'man and Aes Sedai or whatever to really fully clean up the battle's aftermath very much. It's noted in this aftermath that Viren Sedai leaves at some point in here. It also turns out that Olivia, the Shan-Shan, is been paying pretty close attention to various Aes Sedai weaves and is able to learn them just by watching them pretty quickly, which seems to unsettle Min, because Min had that one viewing that kind of told her that Olivia would participate in Rand's death to one degree or another. So that's all stuff that we're going to have to keep an eye on for Check's Watch, like 3 books from now, probably. Loyal informs Rand and the others, now that the battle is over here, that he has to leave for the Great Stump. Elder Haman accepts the task of closing remaining way gates for Rand, because Rand wanted Loyal to do it, but Loyal's going to go to speak at the Great Stump, so that's cool. The Elder's going to do that instead, closing off some of the way gates. Rand in this chapter also meets with Davram Bashir, who has returned from some negotiations related to the Shan-Shan. And he's told that he has a meeting with the Daughter of the Nine Moons in just a few days' time, though it is believed by both Bashir and Logain that this meeting is most likely a trap, which we will see here very soon whether or not that is the case. And then we switch to a brief Nynaeve POV, plus another auxiliary POV, but that still deals with Nynaeve to a certain degree. You also see Nynaeve and Lan discussing together after this battle some of their roles in the world, like what it is that they're actually doing, with Nynaeve basically wanting to continue to watch over Rand and keep an eye on Olivia, it seems like, is what she's wanting to do, but Lan distinctly feeling like he needs to go help in Shi'Enar and be part of the Borderland defense against the last battle, because the last battle is going to see probably a bunch of stuff coming through Malkier, and that's pretty close to Shi'Enar, if I'm not mistaken, on the map, and Lan just feels like he needs to be over there to kind of help take care of that stuff. So Nynaeve actually does go ahead and take Lan over there, and as long as Lan promises to lead some men to actually deal with some of this stuff, so he's not just doing everything all alone, I guess is what Nynaeve was trying to do. And then Nynaeve, instead of transporting Lan to Shi'Enar, actually leaves him, like, and for the record, Shi'Enar is like the furthest east of the Borderland nations. Nynaeve seems to take him basically to the westernmost point of the Borderlands, interestingly enough, instead, and leaves him there. So it seems like her intent is for him to have to cross all the way across the Borderlands to get to Shi'Enar, and she then travels to other locations in Shi'Enar and finds Malkieri people, Malkieri men, and has them promise to fight alongside Lan. Promise that Lan won't fight alone, that he won't travel alone, this kind of thing. The auxiliary POV that happens at the end of chapter 20 is one of these Malkieri people, a merchant who Nynaeve comes across, is just like, promise that Lan won't ride alone because Tarmon Gai'dan is coming and he's going to need help. And then she says that she's going to be doing the same for others, so she has plans to travel to multiple different places in the Borderlands doing this kind of thing before having to return back to Tyr the next day. So that's something that she's doing. I really hope that we get more Nynaeve POV, get some pickup on this kind of story going on in the near future, because these last few books haven't had very much Nynaeve POV, and I've actually really enjoyed all of her stuff basically since, the middle point of The Great Hunt. Whenever she's been one of the predominant characters, I've really enjoyed her character, and I've wanted to see her a little bit more, especially in these last few books where she hasn't had very much POV, basically if at all. So I would definitely like to be able to see a little bit more of that moving forward, but we'll see if that happens, given that she's still going to be with Rand. I kind of doubt it, but who knows. That is something that I hope to see in the near future. But that's going to take us into chapter 21, which sees the whole group, Rand and everybody else, actually going and entering Tyr proper, going to the Stone of Tyr, which seems to be under siege by some rebels within the area. My apologies for this cold. And they go to an inn that kind of overlooks the heart of the stone, so that Rand can be able to just travel inside, use a gateway to travel inside, so that they don't have to deal with whatever the siege type stuff it is that's going on. And he uses his bond to Alana to actually find where it is that she's meeting with some of the High Lords, because I guess, I couldn't remember this specifically, but I guess he had sent Alana to Tyr to kind of meet with some of the High Lords, let them know that he was coming. It doesn't seem like she did, funny enough, but, you know, he goes there, he finds where she's at, where some of the other High Lords are at. He finds that there are a couple people whom he had left in Carrion here, who are not necessarily told to leave Carrion, so there's some of that going on. I don't know what all the political ramifications of what chapter 1 brings to the table are, but there's like some agreements that were made, some agreements that were meant to be made with local Terrans to have been made into basically a bunch of nobles being allowed to return to nobility, I guess is the impression that I got from this, as long as they swear to serve Darlin specifically to be a king who Min had viewed as becoming a king, so now he's going to be a character that is made King of Tyr, not just the steward of Tyr as Rand had placed him, but to just straight up be a king. Rand is at first pretty unhappy because he doesn't like that these people are going to be, you know, sworn fealty to Darlin instead of him, but then he realizes, or has some sense smacked into him by Cadsuane, that basically all of the terms that he had made to be done in Tyr were done, and that he has nothing to really be unhappy about. So he finally decides, just like, okay, I guess things are kind of going okay over here, but then he has Darlin go ahead and start gathering folk to head over to Eredamon for the last battle. So, you know, chapter 21 was basically just some political stuff going on there. We get a lot of mentions of Rand gathering folk in Eredamon specifically, so that's probably going to be one of the major staging places of the last battle, and given that we've had scenes in that sort of region of the world in both of the last couple prologues with what's his bucket, whatever his name is, I forget the name off the top of my head, like Iturralde or something like that, I guess it makes sense that we're going to probably see some stuff happening in Eredamon. So there's that. Chapter 22 sees us move to a different POV. It moves us to Hareen, one of the sea folk, who is on her way to meet with the first 12 of the Athean Mier, the sea folk, given the death of the previous mistress of the ships that we had learned about. I don't remember if that was in this book or last book or whatever at this point when that happened, but something like that happened. Hareen is at a meeting over here. Turns out that much of the sea folk aren't super happy with the bargain that she had to make with Rand, but she's pretty content with the fact that she's surprised that she was able to get as much of a bargain for the sea folk with Rand as she got, so there's some political tensions going on within the sea folk as a result of this in here, and Hareen is also just generally pretty encouraged by the fact that Min did have a viewing of her that said that she herself would become mistress of the ships one day, so, you know, there's some of that going on in here. The meeting that's to be done between the sea folk here in chapter 22 is one that was kind of pre-planned ahead of time, I guess. That was supposed to be with an emissary of the Dragon Reborn, and when this emissary of the Dragon Reborn arrives, it turns out to be Loghain. Loghain just kind of everywhere at this point in time for some reason. Loghain is not allowed to tell the sea folk where it is that Rand is at, because the sea folk would like to know where he's at so that they can have people walk with him, kind of like part of the bargain suggested that they needed to, or rather that they would just like to. I forget the strict details on all of that, but Loghain is not telling them where Rand is at, but that Hareen specifically is a fine ambassador between the sea folk and the Dragon Reborn, which kind of ruffles some feathers a little bit, and Loghain also informs that Rand needs as per the agreement that the Sea Folk would do is whatever they could to help Rand in some of his plots, if it's reasonable. Rand needs supplies being transported to Era Demon. So again, another one of this Era Demon type of thing. But he needs 1 million people's worth of supplies sent over there, which is a little bit crazy. But that is something that he requests of the Sea Folk here. Anyway, news arrives as well at the very end of the chapter that a bunch of Sea Folk Island natives are dead or dying or have just kind of disappeared, self-inflicted due to some prophecies of the Tremel King Seangreal melting, which of course we witnessed happen within the climax of Winter's Heart when the cleansing of Sidon occurred. We got to see those statues both in Carrion, I believe, and Tremel King. Some people watch as some of that happen. So apparently a bunch of Sea Folk natives remembered a bunch of prophecies that this statue, the Seangreal, would disappear, would kind of melt away at some point, and that it would spell doom, or I guess basically be a sign of the last days. And so when a couple of these people witnessed this event happen, a lot of the natives have kind of offed themselves, I guess is kind of the implication of what's gone on here, which is interesting. But that's chapter 22, and now we're going to move on to chapters 23 and 24, and then a tiny little bit of chapter 25, which are all White Tower stuff. And it was at this point in the book, reading a couple of these POVs, particularly chapter 24, which is Egwene POV specific, when I realized part of the problem that I had personally with the last couple books of the series. It turns out that I really like Egwene's plotline. I like her character, I like that plotline, and I like what's going on there. And the fact that that plotline, I'm pretty sure nothing happened in Winter's Heart with regard to that plotline, and basically nothing happened with regards to that plotline until like the very end of the very end of book 10. Of Crossroads of Twilight. So the fact that there is so little of that in these last couple books, and that there was basically none of that in the front half of the book, except for like a little bit of the prologue and like maybe the first couple chapters, I was pretty lukewarm on the first half of Knife of Dreams, I gotta admit. And when I got to these couple chapters here, chapters 23, 24, I kind of realized, just like, I think I know exactly why it is that I've been so lukewarm on some of these books. I think it's because I just wanted more Egwene POV, actually. Between, like, not having much going on with Nynaeve's POV, not having very much Egwene POV, and then some of the POVs that have actually been on screen, like Matt and Elaine, just kind of turning their wheels a little bit, taking too long to do what they're doing, just kind of not using their space very efficiently. And then especially when you have a POV like Perrin's storyline that has just taken 3 books to do one thing. Yeah, like a lot of the stuff that I'm liking about Wheel of Time at this point hasn't been super prominent between like Winter's Heart through now especially, and so I think that that's a lot of why I've been a little bit more lukewarm these last few books, because the stuff that I want and have liked has been pretty much missing or very much on the back burner, whereas the stuff that has been being focused on, that's been getting a lot of word count, has not really had very much happening. So that's an interesting thing to note. But anyway, chapter 23 is a White Tower POV. It is, well, not technically White Tower, it's technically Rebel Aes Sedai camp POV. It is Ramonda, who of course is one of the like opposing Aes Sedai underneath Egwene that are like trying to vie for control of the hall and like basically everything that's going on. Lelaine and Ramonda, of course, are kind of butting heads, wanting to keep each other from becoming Amyrlin, and so Ramonda thinks that the reason that they kind of all agreed on Egwene was so that the other one wouldn't be Amyrlin. But in either case, we have Ramonda POV, where she is considering, in chapter 23, some of the food spoilage problem that's been going on about the camp, but more importantly, there's some big political stuff going on here. everything's political in Wheel of Time, apparently, when Nisal enters to report that Lelaine, again, that kind of opposing Aes Sedai that I mentioned before, has said that the deaths of the Aes Sedai that have occurred in the camp by the hands of Saidin, an unknown assailant who has killed, like, Karen, and then I forget the name of the other Aes Sedai who was killed in this manner. But Lelaine is apparently trying to claim that these deaths need to not be, like, talked about or investigated by the camp at large because they're supposedly Blue Aja business. However, it is the case that Egwene had orders for these deaths to be investigated pretty in-depth, and Ramonda basically kind of supports that. She tells Nisal when this is reported that Lelaine thinks that these deaths are Blue Aja business. She says that, no, this is something that you should investigate a little bit more about, actually, and I would like to know more about that. So that's something that Ramonda has done. Theodrin also comes into Ramonda's tent in this chapter to announce that a sitting of the hall has been called. Ramonda goes over to that. When she arrives, only sitters are allowed present at this one, even though no formal hearing has been called here. And a ward against hearing is set at the hall. So there's obviously some fairly important stuff going on for this to be the case. One of the Aes Sedai named Maurice, Maurice? I don't know. I don't care how names are pronounced at this point in the series. She shows up with 3 Ashaman warders. So that's a pretty big moment. No wonder a hall of the tower was called, or a sitting of the hall was called here. Because of this, one of the Ashaman warders of Maurice detects that Saidin had been used nearby, and the sister who had actually set the warding against hearing confirms that there was some tampering with the warding, that somebody had tried to listen in, but that it wasn't Saidar that had been used to try to listen in. Sorry about that, I just really keep coughing and am having trouble talking. But when this little bit of information is revealed, it actually causes one of the other sitters, named Delana, who of course is the one kind of in charge of Halima, who we know to be Arengar at this point. Delana leaves once this is revealed that Saidin has been used nearby, because Delana, of course, basically knows that that would have been Halima. So, like, Delana just kind of leaves randomly in the middle of this scene. The Ashaman who is speaking here, named Jihar, has a proposal from Rand for the Rebel Aes Sedai camp here. And that proposal is that up to 47 Ashaman can be bonded by sisters who are specifically loyal to Egwene, as a way to kind of repair some damage for a number of sisters who have been bonded by Ashaman at the Black Tower, and this way, the sitters of the hall kind of understand implicitly, like, hey, now we don't have to make political agreements with the Black Tower, we can just bond a bunch of Ashaman, and that is the way that we can have enough power to do what it is that we need to do here, between linking and all of that kind of stuff, without having to do the political stuff with the Black Tower, so that's cool. Yeah, so that's a proposal that is made, and it is also revealed that, good grief, sorry, there is a character, I believe, named Ibn Hopwell, who is said to have died, due to a female Forsaken, who is actually wielding Saidin. I believe that this is something that is revealed from Winter's Heart's climax, that's when that happened. I might be wrong on the timing of that, but I'm pretty sure that that's what happened. And Ramonda kind of puts this clue together along with some of the other stuff that we know about what's going on here, to determine that Delana and Halima are guilty of something, but they have already fled the camp. So they go to try to arrest them, but they've already fled. So now the Rebel Aes Sedai camp knows that Halima is probably Forsaken, basically. So that took long enough. Thank goodness that revelation was made eventually. Yeah, that's chapter 23. And sorry, with all this cold stuff going on right now, the lights just suddenly feel way brighter, so I'm not, like, looking up at the camera very much right now. I'm very sorry for that. Anyway, Chapter 24, as mentioned before, is the Egwene POV that is actually in the White Tower, and this chapter is going to be a little bit more interesting to talk about, just in the sense that there's not a ton of the actual events of the chapter itself that are really worth mentioning. It's mostly just kind of the breadth of what's happening in here, kind of the overarching, point of the chapter that is worth talking about, and that is that Egwene has, of course, been reduced to novice status within the tower, but basically still has to wage her own little personal war of opposition within the tower, asserting that she is still the actual Amyrlin here, and that she's not going to break just because of, punishments from Sylviana, the Mistress of Novices, or anything like this. Her presence amongst the novices, and even the accepted to a certain degree, is kind of a beacon of hope for these girls who are trying to learn. She helps teach them some things. She helps tutor them a little bit. She earns their respect. She also earns respect of a lot of other Aes Sedai while she's in the tower too. There's a lot of punishments that she's divvied out quite frequently because of her obstinance and what position that she kind of finds herself in within the tower. But like I said, she does seem to get a lot of respect from various different people within the tower over the course of the chapter, and she kind of determines at the end of chapter 24 that she believes that she's kind of winning her war, just planting little seeds of what's going on in here, hopefully turning some of the Ajas and some of the other Aes Sedai, some of the younger women as well, a little bit more in her favor. Like I said, earning a little bit of that respect and stuff, because not a bunch of people here seem to really think that Elaida is a super suitable Amyrlin, so that's something that Egwene is working with for her own personal goals. Like I said, there's not a whole lot about chapter 24 that, the actual details of the chapter itself that need to be mentioned. That's just kind of the gist of what that chapter is doing, and I enjoyed it, in spite of the frequent punishments and the kind of cringeworthiness of some of it. To a certain degree, I just really enjoyed being able to experience all these little moments, be like, yeah, I like Egwene, I really like her character, I like her storyline, I like this little war that she's waging in the tower is really fun to experience. But now, at this point, we're going to talk about the first POV specifically of Chapter 25. There's only 2 POVs in here. The first one of those is Tarna from the White Tower. It's only the first few pages of Chapter 25. So, very briefly, we'll just go over what happens in here. Tarna, who is the new keeper of the Chronicle, goes to actually meet with Elaida, kind of wonders about what it is that the Reds are going to do about bonding Ashaman, as something that the Red Aja specifically had decided is something that they're going to go ahead and try to do. That's something that she's wondering about when she goes to Elaida's quarters. When she arrives at Elaida's quarters, it turns out that Miadani is there with Elaida, kind of being used, understandably, as the ferret that she is, because Elaida learned that Miadani and several other of the ferrets from the Rebel Aes Sedai camp are here, that they are ferrets. So it seems like Elaida is now, instead of kind of resisting Miadani's urge to kind of be close a little bit, is now trying to use that proximity against her, since she now knows that she's a ferret. We don't know what degree to which this is working right now, but that is something that we get to see sort of implicitly a little bit from Tarna. Tarna does give Elaida mostly bad news about things that are going on with the tower and with whatever else is going on, particularly that other Ajas are not helping with things in Tar Valon, like clearing Quendalar from their harbor to help get more food and supplies into the area. That, and amongst other things, Elaida kind of dictates proclamations of punishments to sitters who don't organize help, so you can kind of see internally here that there is definitely some bad blood amongst a lot of the Aes Sedai Ajas within the tower, something that, again, as discussed before, Egwene is trying to use to her advantage. At the same time, Elaida also has some punishment threatened to some of the negotiators of the White Tower, people who are trying to negotiate with the Rebel Aes Sedai camp. So it seems like Elaida is pretty cool, cold to this line of attack at this point, and she is also surprised by Egwene's frequency at attending Sylviana, is worried about Egwene being broken down, since that's not what Elaida wanted, apparently. And she also has Egwene ordered to attend herself for dinner that evening. So I don't think there's another POV within the White Tower in this book. I think we've well and truly finished all of that for this book. I think this is the last little POV slice in here that occurs with any of that, so it is probable that we'll see the meeting between Elaida and Egwene, like in the next book, or something like that. We shall see, but that is something that Chapter 25 ends with. There is a little bit of map POV in Chapter 25, but we'll discuss that in next week's diary, since it'll be more relevant to, you know, the handful of chapters that we'll cover next week. So, yeah, thank you for watching this video if you did. I'm very sorry for the cuts, I'm very sorry for the coughing, very sorry for the bad voice, very sorry for just being all out of it right now because of being sick. I apologize, but yeah, that's going to do it for this week's diary. I hope to see you guys in next week's, because yeah, there's some good stuff going on in next week's diary with a little bit of climactic stuff for one of the POVs happening in here, finally, after 3 books, thank God. So we're going to talk about all of that next week. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe, a very sick King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video, whatever and whenever that may be.